You're listening to Potluck, the podcast that stirs up a unique flavor of people, culture, and brands in Asia. Hosted, as always, by Scott and Drago.
Hello and welcome to Potluck. I'm Drago.
And I'm Scott. We record some episodes remotely, don't we, Drago? But it's always good to get in the studio, have a richer conversation in person.
That's right, Scott. So who do we have stirring the pot with us today? Wendy Walker. Wendy Walker is with us. She's a marketing guru. Her marketing career took off in Australia, first in telco, and then in the air travel industry. And she's soared higher and higher since. She's led marketing at brands such as Telstra, Bupa, Manulife, Mindshare, a long list, Salesforce, across both B2C, B2B, countrywide roles in Australia, and then Asia regional, as well as global roles since moving to Singapore in 2013. Beyond her day job, Wendy's been shaping the industry itself. Former board chair of the Marketing Society Singapore, she's founded and now serves as president of the International Advertising Association, IAA, in Singapore. She's also a global board member. Okay, we keep going. She's judged and chaired some of the biggest stages in the industry, from Cannes Lions to Spikes to the Effies. So, whatever you have in your awards cabinet, you may have Wendy to thank. Oh, and she's also just added author to the list with her new book, Between Flights, Reflections on the Unspoken Truths of Leadership and Life. So today we're speaking of the unspoken. Wendy, welcome to Potluck. Thanks for coming to stir the pot with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And that's about all we've got time for. It's quite long-winded, isn't
right.
it? So,
well, there was a lot to go through.
Yes.
Wendy, thanks for coming in today. Let's start on the ground level, if you like, to extend the between flights metaphor. So we wanted to start by asking, why are you a marketer? What's the personal kind of driver to be involved in this space?
Well, I think it's a playground being a marketer. And for me, it's all about curiosity. You know, I think you have to be a very curious person to be a good marketer. And it's really curiosity in other human beings and what drives behaviour. And I think, you know, even if I reflect back to when I was a child, I always remember sort of sitting and contemplating, I wonder why that person acted that way. And so I think that the psychology that goes into being a marketer is fascinating. And of course, as our world evolves and the environments that we find ourselves in keeps changing, that affects all of our behaviour as well. And so that inherently then affects the way we need to behave as marketers. So I love it. You know, I'm definitely in my DNA and been a marketer for way too many decades.
And when you've started out as a marketer in Sydney or Melbourne, what does Asia look like from an Australian point of view? So obviously you transition from those kind of roles in Australia to regional and APAC-centric roles. So tell us more about that lens you bring, if you like.
Yeah, look, I think I've done a couple of CMO roles in Australia, and even when you have Asia, which a lot of CMOs in Australia, based in Australia, do, it's not the same as living here. And I think it's, you know, there's a constant re-education process that happens as a global marketer, but particularly in this region, that Asia is not one country. So if you're operating in Australia, and this is a very broad sweeping statement, quite often you might be marketing into different states. So, you know, Western Australia is very different to New South Wales, and, you know, you treat the audiences slightly differently. But if you bring that to Asia, where it's a melting pot, you know, Indonesia is not Japan, and Japan is not Malaysia, and Malaysia is definitely not Singapore, right? Yeah. So you're dealing with so many different, you know, cultures and nuances and ways of doing business that I just find it an absolute, you know, mosaic and playground, and just an incredible joy to be here and be immersed here. My first role when I moved to Singapore, I was Chief Growth Officer for Mindshare, which was an amazing role because I was able to travel around all of the different Mindshare offices in the region, spend time immersing myself with the local teams and really understanding how they were doing business and how they got things done in their local markets. And that's fascinating, very different to operating in the big, great southern land. You know?
Amazing.
Very interesting. Another pattern that we noticed in your career, just to pull it apart a bit more, is that you've worked with these amazing big organizations, So as a marketer, what is the appeal of the big organization? And over the years, in your experience, has the opportunity, potentially the constraint involved in that kind of role changed, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think the appeal for a large organisation, particularly if you're a younger marketer, you can learn an incredible amount. So if you're put into a space where there are different specialisms, you can really go deep on whether it's sponsorship or, digital, even though everything now is digital. But it really helps to train you in the craft. And that's a great environment as a grounding. But on the flip side, in terms of constraints, it can mean that you are used to having that infrastructure around you, and you need to encourage yourself to be able to be a generalist, because I think there's a lot of positives in today's world for people that can cover a broad spectrum of marketing disciplines. And, the generalist skill is coming back into fashion. I've worked in smaller organisations as well, and then also deceptively organisations that appear huge, but their marketing is very small. Okay. And so you are doing a lot of work right across all of the different disciplines, but you're, working for this very large brand. So I've been really lucky. I've had both experiences, built a lot of marketing teams from absolute ground zero, where there's been maybe nobody or a couple of junior marketers, and really scaled those functions. And that's a lot of fun. And of course, when you've got some budget to play with as well, that can be even more fun.
So we'd love to focus more, Wendy, on the origins of your book, Between Flights. So reflections.
Where's the camera?
Yeah, over there. Yeah. Reflections on the unspoken truths of leadership and life. So can you tell us more about the origins of the book? Where did it come from? What's the essence of the content of Between Flights?
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. It's brought me a lot of joy putting this out to the world, particularly as we were saying earlier before we started. It's a tangible sort of piece of evidence of something you've created, but totally by accident. So I would almost call myself an accidental author, because if you'd asked me at the beginning of 2025, you're going to publish a book this year, there is no way I would have thought I had time to do that. So this literally started because I had about 18 months to 2 years in my role at Salesforce, where I was constantly on a plane, flying somewhere and traveling. And I got to the point where I just really couldn't watch another piece of content. I didn't want to listen to anything. I'm quite good at sitting in silence and thinking. And so I would reflect on, conversations I'd had that day, or a problem that was going on at work, or whatever it might be. And one day I just decided to pull out literally the Notepad app on my phone, and just wrote a few things down. And from there it started to grow. And I ended up with about 30 different Notepad pages of reflections, all different topics, random, but they were there. And I had this conversation about, most of us have had this with a friend, what are you watching on Netflix right now, right? And this extended into, I haven't been watching anything on the flights, I've been writing. And I let a friend read a couple, and she said, you should put that on LinkedIn. And I thought, you know what, I'm a marketer, and I've never personally tested the newsletter function on LinkedIn. I should give it a go. So that's literally how it started. I called it Between Flights because that was, in essence, between and on flights, when they were written. And I sort of had this explosion of interest. And what really then drove me to put it together as a book was just the number of personal messages, and even to the point of very emotional video messages that people have sent me, just saying, oh my goodness, I've just read your piece. It just came at exactly the right moment. That's exactly what I'm feeling like right now, but I couldn't put it into words, and it's really helped me. And that was just such a gift to me. Here I was writing these things for an audience of one, myself, not expecting anyone else to ever read them, and they just resonated so fully. So that's really what motivated me to then do a bit of extra work and create a book.
Oh, amazing. We're going to dive into it in more detail now. So
it's amazing when you have the personal and the universal come together like that. Yeah. But let's dig in deeper a little bit into the subtitle, the subheading of the book. So why are these truths that you're talking about in the book unspoken?
I think, again, a lot of it has been aspects of life, and particularly in busy corporate roles in particular, that many of us think about, or things that we're dealing with, but we don't necessarily always talk about and we don't say out loud. And so again, for me, if you think of where this started, It was my reflections in my own head and just putting them down in writing. And so that's where that sort of unspoken piece came from. And I think a lot of, one of the chapters in there is called Heartbreak in Transit, and that was one that particularly resonated because it's all about that heartbreak that you go through when you've built something in a corporate environment and then it either gets destroyed in one fell swoop, or there's a restructure, or there's, mass layoffs like we've had in so many industries recently. That is really actually heartbreaking, and just as heartbreaking as going through a relationship breakup. And that really resonated with people because I think we are so often expected to just soldier on and be adaptable and, put a facade on that you're dealing with things in a corporate environment, and it can be really quite personally painful for people. So I think to sort of put that, articulate it, and give people a reason to think, well, I'm not the only one feeling that way, and have an option to come together and discuss it has been really good. I know it's landed in a few book clubs, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
And if we zoom in on the timing of it happening, why speak of the unspoken now? You mentioned maybe it's about your personal journey. Is it something about the broader cultural context, something about the business environment right now? What compelled you to speak of the unspoken right now?
I think ever since the end of the pandemic, the world did slow down, right?
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful period,
Sure.
right? We all got in touch with each other in many ways. And then we've come back to this world that is, accelerating in pace with AI, and all of that is putting more and more pressure on all of us working in, the business world. And I think the pace of change means that we do have to constantly be adaptable, and we're becoming more efficient, so therefore there's higher expectations. I think there's a sense of real exhaustion. And so for me, writing probably the first few lines on my Notepad app was all about just feeling like, my goodness, this is not sustainable, right? And really feeling that way, and what something has to give here. What can I get rid of so that I'm not feeling quite so constantly overwhelmed and burnt out and exhausted? And I think that was the starting point for a lot of it. And so there's quite a thread of themes in that territory, and I think that is such a consistent emotion that people are feeling in the workplace right now. So I think for me it was a personal motivation. Again, I was writing them for myself to start with. But I think there's lots of unspoken truths in particularly in corporate life that we just don't talk about,
Okay, well, that's great, because our next question was going to be, if we try to stir a little bit harder yet, is there anything that is left yet unspoken that you felt a little bit uncertain about, you held back on, maybe you would like to address in the future? What might that be?
I think the wonderful Brené Brown, really made vulnerability a trend some years back. And I think vulnerability is something that I talk about in the book in a couple of different ways. But I think what I haven't probably overtly put out there is the fact that you just can't show a sign of weakness in the workplace. It's really, a lot of organisations talk about building an environment of psychological safety. I find that mostly to be lip service, and it's sometimes I've seen people in the workplace, and unfortunately particularly women, who embrace vulnerability and share, whether it's personal aspects or just a sign of weakness, right? And you can almost, because I guess the marketer in me loves watching that psychology and how people behave, and you can see how the chess pieces move once that vulnerability, that raw vulnerability, has been exposed. And having seen that happen to others has made me feel a little bit more guarded about, I'll be vulnerable in the right way in the workplace, but I'm not going to expose everything, because there's a risk that comes with that. And so if you really want to stir the pot, I bet you there are many people that will listen to this going, exactly, right? We can be vulnerable to a certain degree, but we can't truly, truly feel 100% safe if we show that sign of weakness. And I think that's a real territory that I would love to hear of organisations that are really getting that right.
Why is that, do you think? Why can't we be vulnerable? Why can't we show weakness, especially from a female leader's point of view?
I think that's where ambition and ego comes in, right? You know, when you're working in a large organisation or even a smaller organisation, just working with other humans, you've got all different personalities and all different motivations behind those personalities. So if you've got people that are ruthlessly ambitious or are, full of ego, it can change their behaviour in response to seeing someone who is demonstrating the opposite, and I think that's where it comes in. So I don't know whether there's a solve for it. I know lots of great organisations put a lot of policies in place around, whistleblowing and, non-retaliation and all of those sorts of policies, which are great safeguards. But at the end of the day, it still doesn't mean you can necessarily be there and be truly, truly vulnerable.
Let's zoom in a bit more on leadership, Wendy. So you spoke about vulnerability, and maybe that's an important but maybe not always evident quality of good leadership. And obviously the marketing world and the business world has been full of discussion about leadership, the cult of leadership, for probably a decade or more now. Why do you think we kind of struggle, if you like, to put our finger on exactly what leadership is and how we sort of define leadership in that sense? What would you say to that?
I think leadership in itself is really polarising, right? And, I can think of great leaders that I've worked with over the years, and usually they are completely polarising. And, some people will adore them and follow them off the edge of a cliff, and others will absolutely push against them. And so I think we've all as individuals got probably a slightly different definition in our minds of what makes a great leader from that. I think for a long time, I think it's probably less so now, but, there were a long time as leaders and managers, and we were taught what's the difference between a good leader and a good manager. But I think in today's environment, you need to be able to lead. And in my humble opinion, being a great leader is all about really caring for the individuals that you work for, with, and, who that work for you. And caring about their experience and hoping that they get something out of coming to work every day, that they're developing their careers, whatever's motivating them to get out of bed every morning, they're feeling fulfilled, in the workplace.
Do you think it's an inherent occupational hazard of being a leader that you do have that polarisation, that maybe whatever style you choose to naturally adopt, that, and if that's the case, then how do you guard against the sort of those that you maybe are polarising or pushing away? Is that about having a good team in place to kind of balance the, you obviously have different leaders within versus at the top? I mean, do you have any views on how you kind of, bring everybody into the universe, if you like, versus...
Absolutely. I mean, to be a good leader, and you learn over time, you're not going to be liked by everybody. There's that saying that 30% of people will love you, 30% will hate you, and the rest of them are quite indifferent to you, right? And it's so true. And you have to be prepared that, 30% of people are not going to like you, are not going to like your style, and going to look for ways to not agree with your direction. And that's just natural. But if, the 30% that love you is wonderful, but it's that indifferent sector that is really wonderful to lead, because if you can really motivate them and bring them on a journey, to me that's a great achievement. But you do need to sort of get over that case of, which I see in very young or in the early stages of their leadership journey, they just want to be liked by everybody, and it's not something that's ever going to be achievable.
I mean, just brings us on to, in the book you talk about wanting to be known as a remarkable leader, not because of being the loudest voice, but for being the kind of leader people feel safe with, stretched by, seen by. But you also talk about this tension between ambition and authenticity in that breath. Can you tell us more about that tension that unfolds with leadership? Yeah,
I think I have, and I talk a little bit about this in the book, I have an interesting relationship with ambition. I've always, for many, many years, I said, I'm not ambitious at all. And I had to learn to be better at almost talking about my own achievements, because I would always use the teams that I led to talk about their achievements, which of course then reflected on me anyway. So it was, it was not a bad thing. But I never liked to speak of ambition as something that I owned and that I felt. But in reflection, I probably am ambitious, just in a different way to others. I want to leave places better than when I joined them, particularly in the workplace. We were talking earlier, I love to go into organisation and build things or solve problems or help them transform. And I could look back on my career, there's some amazing brands that I've had the privilege to work with, and I can definitely say I've left each of those places in a better state. And for me, that has fed my ambition of achieving what I wanted to achieve, And I think that authenticity piece is really getting in touch with who you are as a person, and I think that only comes with time and age, unfortunately. You really get to know yourself and what brings you joy, what gets you out of bed, what really is important to you. And unfortunately, if I knew what I knew now when I was 20, don't know whether I would have done anything differently, but maybe wouldn't have got hung up on the small stuff as much as maybe I did.
And I guess that authenticity lends itself to like maybe kind of maturing as a leader and bringing that out more in your leadership versus like a front or
exactly. Always having to be on, and having that facade of nothing's rattling me. I think it's great, and same as being a parent as well, right? It's good for your kids and it's good for your team members to see that you're not perfect. You do get things wrong occasionally, and how you handle that failure or that emotion is so important, and equally important for your kids as well as team members that might aspire to be you, because you don't want to put that much pressure on your teams.
Great. So we spoke about the tension between ambition and authenticity. We really love how in the book you're bringing to life a couple of more tensions, and if we can talk about them now.
Sure.
So another tension is between intentionality and serendipity, if you will. And we like, by the way, how the kind of language you use in the book, the alliterations, the allusions, it's so rich, it's lovely. One of the main metaphors of the book is the window seat metaphor, Can you tell us a little bit about what the window seat metaphor represents and why it's so important?
I think it's that whole concept of just removing yourself from within the situation and having a bit of a helicopter view or a window seat view, right? And being able to look in and being open to perspectives of others and how they may have viewed that situation or that problem or that moment in time, and how you might need to adjust your own perspective a little bit. Because, of course, as humans, it's really based on how you've been brought up, what environment, the way you'll look at a certain thing versus the person sitting next to you. So I think the window seat is about making sure you're stepping back and getting different perspectives. But I also just think it's great to take the time to do that and reflect and think about both the good times, the good discussions, the good achievements, but also the tough ones. I think often as humans we tend to focus too much on the negative and I failed there or this didn't go the way I planned. But being able to sit and reflect on what did go really well, I think is equally important and part of that whole window seat territory.
So how do you make sure that you can tap into that space? How can you be purposeful about creating that opportunity within the liminal?
Yeah, I think it's carving out time.
Okay.
Right? And that can be tough. I mean, I'm a big believer in diary, management and how to create space in your diary, and that does mean blocking out time and time for thinking and preparation ahead of conversations, and then reflection time afterwards. And I think as a leader that becomes more and more important, because you are to a degree being paid for the experience and the brain that you have and the thinking that you can bring to certain situations. And so it's more important for leaders to take that time to have that moment to reflect. So I think, diary management is important and building that time in, but then just using time that you do have wisely. Again, I could watch Devil Wears Prada for the 50,000th time on the flight, or I could sit and really think about a really fascinating conversation I'd had that day and what it meant and what I got out of it. And, that is far more valuable to me, rather than doom scrolling.
Right.
Just one, obviously, for everybody, creating time is different based on your personal life. And just curious if there's anything tactically you found really worked. Because obviously, coming out of COVID, we heard a lot about people kind of maybe moving to days at home, days in the office. Then you hear some companies where there's no meetings and certain half-day slots. So was there anything you found that worked collectively? Because obviously it's one thing to protect your time, but to make sure others are kind of given the same opportunity. Is that something you've
definitely.
implemented?
I mean, I did a couple of things with my team at Salesforce, particularly during the pandemic and afterwards. I mean, very basic was just blocking out time in their diary. So as their leader, I would just block afternoons in their diary so that nobody else could put meetings in to enforce, this is wellness time, get away from the computer and go and do something that brings you joy.
Nice.
So that they would get that space. But then I'm also a big believer, and I tried to, instill this in my team, managing your own energy throughout the day. And a great way to do that is, inherently who are the people that you meet with that really bring you energy.
Charge you up. And,
right?
Yeah.
And that you could chat to all day. And who are the ones that really drain you? And it might not even be a person, but it might be a particular meeting, that it's just pins in your eyes and you just don't want to be there and it really drains your energy. So some of those are necessary parts of our working lives and you have to do it. So try and build energizing meetings or catch-ups around that so that you're peppering your day with moments that will bring you that energy. And then do things that also bring you energy, like step away from your computer, go for a walk, go and, give your pets a pat or whatever. Something that brings you personal joy, because that will also help you manage your energy. And again, as a leader, it's critical because your team is watching you and watching your energy levels and feeding off that as well. So really important that you're able to manage that to be more effective. Yeah.
And speaking more of practical exercises, you talk a lot in the book about reflection and reflection exercises. There's a number of them sewn across the book. One of the exercises that I personally love is this idea of the personal boardroom, where you talk about it's not just who do I know, but who can help me grow, who can help me move forward, help me stay grounded. It did remind me of a Scott Galloway philosophy of greatness being in the agency of others, and kind of you're only as good as those that you surround yourself with, and form the committee, if you like. So tell us maybe more about, if not that exercise, the role of these reflection exercises and why you feel they're important in general. Yeah,
look, I think the personal boardroom is a great one for people to do, particularly if they haven't done it in a structured way before, because you suddenly realise, I've got a person that I've known since I was late teenage. I will always go to him if I need him to call me out on something, or really give me the honest truth. He won't sugarcoat anything. And so that's, that a really important person to have in your life that, nothing will change between you, but you can give them something that's going on for you and how you're responding to it and get them to give you their honest opinion. And I think most people have these different characters in their life. They may just not have consciously identified it. And I think it's that you don't necessarily need to sit there and write it all down, but to be sort of identifying who are your go-to people in different types of situations is really, really valuable. Because as we know, when you're in a high stressful situation or you're going through something that is causing a lot of pain or stress, knowing instinctively who it is that you can turn to is really, really important. So if you've sort of done that work mentally prior, that can be really, really useful. And then I think the other exercise that I love to do, which again, they're written out as exercises in the book in the final section, but you can do it in your mind. You don't necessarily need to be sitting with a pen and paper, is the one which is all about relationship alignment. Because relationships change. And so the idea of this one is that you pick if you're thinking about stakeholders, for instance, who are the different stakeholders and what role do they play? And then you put yourself in their shoes and look at how they would rate you out of 10 or rate the relationship. And it's a really, soul-bearing, honest exercise because, again, as humans, we naturally tend to foster the relationships that are a bit easier and a bit nicer. And so if you've got stakeholders that are really important for you to get your job done, but they're not necessarily the most comfortable ones, it's actually really important to invest more time in those relationships. And this is a good way to kind of give yourself that score. You're not going to share it with anybody, but it just gives you a guide of, that's only a 3. I really need to spend some time on that one, and how do I go about fostering that relationship? And I found that's really useful to do every 6 months or so, because the work environment changes, those relationships change, something might happen that you suddenly need to swing your attention to, a different relationship to make sure that it's healthy.
Yes.
Now, we spoke about vulnerability already, but can we spend a little bit more time talking about that, of the importance of being vulnerable as a leader, as you said, but at the same time in the book you recognize the importance of being able to move fast, so the role of speed, the role of certainty, and how you put in the book that the realization that grey doesn't always need to be fixed at the same time. So can you talk about that tension between, sort of speed, the need for speed on the one hand, and valuing the personal and embracing uncertainty, pausing?
Look, I think that's becoming more and more important in today's environment, working environment, because everything's moving faster. And as things move faster, it means you need to be able to make decisions faster. And I think we've all worked either for or with someone that take way too long to make a decision. And it's the most frustrating thing to be around, because you can see that you're missing opportunities because this decision has not been made. And so I think the sign of a good leader is someone who you need to be able to back yourself and make those decisions, knowing the risks and having very quickly evaluated the risks that may come with that decision might be the wrong one, and being okay with that. I like to say I'm the queen of contingency plans. So my team would all know that, as we're working through and building a plan, I will always say, so what do we do if that doesn't work? What do we do if that doesn't work? Like, let's be at least thinking about it. That does 2 things. One, it allows your team to know it's actually okay if it fails, right? Yeah. But let's be thinking about, what do we do if it does? And that's great training for anyone in any role, I think, in any environment. So it's dealing with that speed, being able to make those fast decisions, and then ambiguity. A lot of, again, more junior leaders really struggle when you don't have all the information and it's ambiguous environment. Yeah. But ambiguity is becoming more and more constant, I think. And so being quite comfortable in ambiguity is a really great skill to have in today's environment. And again, that makes some of those decision-making moments a little bit more difficult. But it's about being able to back yourself in those moments and trusting your instincts sometimes, but trusting your experience as well.
And just embracing the kind of empowerment and the strength that lack of control, if you will, seemingly lack of control, but in fact you spoke about contingency plans, so what all that preparation and embracing uncertainty gives you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can always be well prepared, but you may not know how something is going to go, and that's okay as well, as long as and when you're making these decisions that might be millions of dollars in value, obviously you need to really manage the risk associated with that. But if you've been prepared and had a contingency, it just, makes that feel a lot safer. But it doesn't mean that you can go any slower with decisions either, because sometimes not making a decision can cost millions of dollars.
Okay.
It does also make me think about with AI, a lot of the narrative is regarding, how it will free up time to then do the kind of higher value strategic work. But you could also argue the opposite of just putting more pressure on the time which has been freed up to move even faster. I mean, is that something you were kind of seeing in the last few years?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, AI is incredible. And, I'm sure, like yourselves, you've found ways in your personal life to just suddenly you can do things much faster.
Yeah.
And that's great, but we're all doing more and more and more.
Yeah.
I know, during my time at Salesforce, obviously wonderful place to be working when AI technology is coming to the forefront. And, within my marketing team, we were able to automate at least 30% of some of the things that we were doing manually to be completely automated. And that did free up time for people maybe not to be working at such high capacity, right? But also hopefully to be taking those pauses and thinking about, okay, we want to do this, what do we do if that doesn't work? And having those really great judgment opportunities, because AI is making everything more efficient, sure, but I think the leaders in the future are not going to be judged on how well they use AI. It's how well they know what only humans can do, right? Which is really good judgment, trust, taste, empathy, all of those human qualities that only we can do. And I think that's becoming more and more important. But yeah, if you're a person that likes to be busy like me, I do have to put personal constraints on how much more I try and squeeze into the day, because all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I can be so productive.
Do even more. Yeah.
But you can do, you need to take a pause.
In confirmation of what you just said, actually, there was a study by the Harvard Business Review you may have seen that actually shows exactly that. As people think their time is freed up, they end up doing more and more and more because they're able to, and they're taking on roles that are actually not assigned either. So that generates a lot more work, a lot more slop.
Yes.
It's so hard to, because it's so easy to do more. To your point, it is a matter of kind of doing less. It's about the stuff that you can't quantify. Yeah? It's about the qualitatively different stuff that's hard to put your finger on. You spoke about empathy, stuff that AI maybe can't do
really
for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's loop it back to the tension that Drago mentioned before. So the idea of speed versus self-care. In the book, you talk a lot about the risk of burnout or the experience of burnout. There's a good quote from an anecdote with a fellow CMO that talks about that she feels she's leading in a permanent state of triage, which is just kind of interesting metaphor. And that's really a product of this sheer exhaustion you talk about from adapting constantly to the pace of change, modern corporate life. So I guess building on what you just talked about further, what do you think is the role here in the modern business world of saying no, pushing back, maybe the comfort of returning to the familiar to kind of recalibrate with yourself and reconnect with others?
I think, again, it's just as important what you don't do as what you do.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for all of us reflecting back on leaders that we may have had in, our younger years, seeing what they've said no to was really important because it helped guide you, A, first of all, know that you could say no to some things, B, how to do that and what was important not to do. And I think that's super important, A, in your own personal positioning and what you're prepared to do and what you're not, but also managing the big important items. There are things that will shift the needle for business. And, what I always come back to, what is the job to be done here? What are we being asked to do? What do we need to deliver? And how do we best get that done that supports the brand, supports the people that work for the brand and supports the customers? Is this piece of busy work over here with self-imposed deadlines really adding to that? Or is it in fact going to detract from some really important things that we need to take care of? So I think being able to say no is a skill, and it can be, depending again on the work environment, it can be quite difficult for people to say, no, I can't do that. But getting comfortable with it is really, really important.
And I guess it comes back to your point about vulnerability, like saying no can seem like a weakness or, without having the toolkit maybe to justify. It's interesting that kind of how do you empower people and the teams to be able to feel they can say no. And I think this idea of, like knowing when that feels, justified. But I think not everybody has that, especially in Asian cultures. There's that sense of like, I'm following a leader. I need to be, seen to be adding to my desk and
being compliant. I can think of many conversations I've had with team members where I've literally started with, I want to talk to you about this opportunity. You can say no if you want to, but I want you just have this conversation is just about sharing this, so you can go away and have some time to think about it, and then we'll have another conversation about it. So even with best intentions and doing all of that, you can still end up with a team member just saying, okay, because Wendy's come along and introduced this idea to me or this opportunity, so I need to do it. When in actual fact, it's trying to present opportunities to also discover more about your team members, about where their passions lie. So it's a really fine balance, and I definitely think in some of our Asian cultures there is that level of compliance that just means you have to really treat it with kid gloves and make sure somebody give the person plenty of opportunities to say no and make it 100% safe for them to say no.
Yeah. And I guess even things like deadlines are often very arbitrary. They've been set at with some project manager at some point months ago, and you have to wake up some days and go, why are we working to this timeline? Is this really needed? And you find out later there's actually a lot more slack, or, how do you...
Yeah, self-imposed deadlines. I think my team's probably giggled in meetings sometimes where I've said to the person, whatever that is, so is this a real deadline or is this a self-imposed deadline? And that happens so often without people realising. They just think, 2 weeks,
I mean, I remember a banking client saying to me, "Oh, Scott, you always set very aggressive timelines." And I was like, I thought I was doing this because you wanted the fast timeline. And it ends up this mismatch of we're racing ahead. And they're like, no, just slow down. We'll need some more time for, getting buy-in for all the process. And you're like, okay, fine, music to my ears. But interesting to hear that, set the outside perception as well. Yeah.
And that's also really important in response time, right? Because I'm the sort of person, I have a zero inbox, I really need... for my own mental well-being to not have things piling up. And so I like to see something, address it, respond to it, which means people are often getting responses very quickly. And what I've realised over time is you also need to manage that. So good scheduling emails or scheduling Slack messages is great because it can set a perception that, she didn't come back to me immediately, so I don't need to immediately go back to her, Otherwise, you realise you're setting these paces in the organisation or within your team that you didn't intend to, but they suddenly start to occur and everybody's feeling, like they're on a very fast treadmill.
Great. So it feels like we were kind of naturally coming to the end of our conversation today. We kind of started on the ground and then we looked at different seats, the aisle seat, the window seat, if you will. There's kind of this big light flashing in the cabin that we noticed in the book to extend the metaphor. Nothing alarming, but it's quite a notable one, we thought. And I did a search because I read your book on Kindle. The word clarity pops up almost 30 times. So we'd like to spend some time to ask you to unpack the role of clarity for you in what you do and how you get there.
Well, I think clarity is the opposite of ambiguity, right? Yeah. I think maybe that word is used a lot because, again, the origin of these reflections was me probably writing things down to get my own personal clarity around how I felt about something or what I learnt from something. So that's probably where that comes from. But I think clarity is really important if you can get it, but you can't always, and that's where that being comfortable with ambiguity piece comes in. But I think what we can do is we can be as in touch with ourselves as we possibly can and have our own personal clarity about what is my point of view around this particular aspect or this, this decision or situation. Because I think there's, often personally, I've taken a step back and thought, okay, I've been part of this conversation and I've kind of gone along with this conversation because it all sounded very convincing. But now that I step away and I take that window seat, actually, I don't really agree with where that's going. And so that brings me clarity of then knowing how I need to approach that either next time or to go back to that discussion, consideration and inject a little bit more into it because I've been able to get my own clarity of how I really feel about it.
Or the clarity to say no, as you said earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
And I think that comes back to even what you've been doing as the genesis for the book, these reflections, the writing. We often see you learn, you understand things better by writing, and now there's often, again, pushback on that from the AI front if you're just generating. But it's interesting that I guess that comes full circle to this idea of why it's important to have these reflection exercises to, even if you're not writing for what may end up being a newsletter or a book, how important that can be to crystallise what you're thinking and feeling. Yeah,
it's super powerful, and I would encourage anyone to, have a go at writing if it's not something you've typically been comfortable with. I think everybody's got a book in them, and it is such a cathartic thing to sit and write and look at the form of the words and, how you make them sound and alliterations and all of those sorts of tools. But it can bring a lot of joy, a lot of clarity, a lot of self-belief and self-confidence as well. So it's a wonderful thing to do.
And did you find writing the book that because it was based on notes which were kind of raw and authentic, you were able to bring your voice to because I think one challenge I can imagine writing a book, not that I have, would be the tension between trying to find a tone of how you think you should sound to the world, kind of, you know, clever, knowledgeable, and versus just kind of engaging and, you know, like your true self. Was that something you found easier because you made these notes and newsletter articles?
Yes, and again, purely by accident. So one of the most lovely pieces of feedback I got early on was someone who left me a voice message saying, Wendy, I'm loving reading these because it's literally, I can hear your voice speaking the words. It's exactly you. And I thought, yeah, well, it is me because I only wrote it for myself.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things I had to do when I turned it into the book was set all the backstories. So, for example, the CMO, that, you know, examples, they were all in my head, but I hadn't actually written those down because I didn't need to. Because I didn't need to set the backstory or the context.
To bring it to life for
because
the reader.
the audience was me. But when you're writing for others, you need to fill in those gaps. So that was where I had to put the extra effort and go back to a lot of these and add those things in. But yeah, it's a, you know, great experience, and as I said, it's very, very cathartic.
Just a quick follow-up question on that. Speaking of kind of gaining clarity through the process of writing, as you've completed the book and you started talking about it with different people, is there an added kind of layer of clarity around what you did and why you did it? Is there kind of a discovery for you that comes out of maybe even the conversation that we just had?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, something I've learned over the years, and I, you know, in my 20s, I was absolute a perfectionist. You know, I've always been someone who considers myself a high achiever, but I've had to let go of perfection, and we all should, because it's, you know, it's fraught with danger, constantly chasing it. And so again, as a good leader, 80% sometimes is good enough, and it should be, because it sets the bar for your team. So perfection is something that we, you know, shouldn't necessarily chase. But putting this book together, I ended up speaking to other authors, and what I found was a really common theme, and then I realised why you hear so many authors taking so long to publish a book is because they're really seeking that perfection. So when I look at this, as much as I'm very proud of putting it out into the world, if I was to rewrite some of these, I would probably change them because it's my thoughts and they're evolving over time. So that's why you'll still see me publishing new thoughts every week, because I'm still writing and doing it as a newsletter, but none of that will appear in there, and vice versa. Because you just learn that actually these are moments in time, these are reflections, you can put them out into the world. They don't have to be perfect, but if one or two people get something out of reading it, then that's an absolute joy. And I think the other thing is I've just learnt that I do love to write, and it really is wonderful. So I've got another 2 books on the go at the moment. Because once you get into the rhythm, you find how amazing it is for yourself. Obviously for certain personalities like mine, and it's just such a joy. So yeah, I've got a few things on the go.
Well, we look forward to hearing more when news is available on those.
Thank you.
So Wendy, thanks so much for coming to stir the pot with us today. It's been fascinating. For those that haven't read Between Flights, we thoroughly recommend it. And yeah, amazing. Thanks so much for such a rich conversation, Wendy.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. For our listeners, where can they follow your thinking and learn more about your work?
So Between Flights is on all your local Amazon stores and in most of the big book retailers, which is amazing. But you can follow me on LinkedIn, and I publish 2 newsletters, Between Flights, which is, again, reflections of anything that's going on at the moment, and then a B2B marketing piece called the B2B Reset, which is all about B2B marketing in the modern world and what we need to be thinking about to future-proof. So LinkedIn's a great place to find me.
And of course, you'll also be found at IA events, which are often quite frequent around in Singapore and beyond.
Our community has grown so quickly. We'd love people to join. You can go to iasingapore.org and check it out and see all of the events that are coming up, and, you know, come and connect in person.
Amazing.
From first-hand experience, amazing event. So please check them out.
Okay, so without further ado, in the meantime,
keep on brewing.